Lord, give us grace this morning that we would be both hearers and doers of the word. Amen. So I'm going to try something this morning. You may have noticed that sometimes at St. John's we use the proper noun God instead of using gendered pronouns in our prayers. Well, I prefer not to put God in a box by using a lot of gendered words. And the word God already appears in my sermon 24 times. So I didn't want to go ahead and just keep doing that. So you'll notice today that I will switch between using he and she for God. I've been doing this with our kids for a while. They all seem to really like it because it includes everybody. So hopefully you guys can follow along with that as well today, and just know that it's purposeful that I am switching the gendered pronouns. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far, nope, that isn't it. Once upon a time, still not right. Picture it, Sicily, 19, no, definitely not. It was the best of times, it was the worst of, well, no, that doesn't fit either. It was a dark and stormy night. Come to think of it, it was a dark and stormy night, as cliche as that might be. I was 15 years old, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor. There was a storm outside, the power was out, and I had lit candles. I was praying for a friend, and as I prayed, I very clearly heard, "Holly, bring my sheep home." I knew God had spoken to me. When I told my mom, she told me to stop talking about it and to never tell anyone because they would think I was crazy. Well, 28 years later, and here I am standing in front of you as a person whose purpose in life is to guide our youngest sheep into a relationship with God, which to me is the definition of home. I'm sure my mom is looking down, having a good laugh at herself, because it turns out I wasn't crazy after all. God is funny that way. In today's gospel, Jesus is making his way from town to town, and he sees the crowds of people who need help, and he has compassion for them. Jesus says to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Basically, he says to them, there are a lot of people out here who need help and not enough people to help them. Go pray and ask God to send someone to help. We assume that the disciples went away to do so. Then, in the next verse, Jesus again calls his disciples to him, and he gives them the authority to do the work he had been doing, including healing people and casting out demons. So Jesus sent the disciples away to pray to God, to send people to do the work, and then he called them back to let them know they were in fact the very people they had been praying for. God is funny that way. In one of the commentaries I read on this verse, the author stated this was pretty much a case of be careful what you pray for, or you just might get it. I couldn't agree more. Not only did Jesus call on his disciples to continue his work, he called each of them by name. He didn't just gather them and say, "Okay, all of y'all go out and do these things." He took the time to call each disciple by name, so there was no doubt he was speaking directly to them. The call was personal, it was purposeful, and it was, I am sure, life-changing. Jesus commissioned his disciples to go out into the world to heal people and to share the good news. So our story today is over, right? 12 dudes, 2,000 years ago, were called and they did some cool stuff, and then the end. Yeah, no. See, it doesn't quite work that way. The call didn't end 2,000 years ago. Guess what, friends? The harvest is still plentiful, and the laborers are still few. How often do we ask ourselves or others, why doesn't God do something? Why doesn't God send someone to help? How can God sit back and just let this happen? I hate to tell you, often the answer is, God did do something. She called you. She did send someone to help. God sent you. God is funny that way. You might be sitting and listening to me today and thinking, but I'm not qualified to do church-type things. How can I answer the call? Well, let's look at the disciples. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Matthew was a tax collector, which I discovered while researching this made him not only kind of a jerk, but he was also considered a traitor to the Jewish people. Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, and most of the disciples were poor fishermen. Don't you think they asked themselves if they were qualified? There is an age-old adage I've heard in the church, and it says, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. God is calling you to something, and she will give you what you need to do it. We aren't all called to ordained ministry, but it doesn't mean we aren't called to ministry. Everything you do to help with God's harvest is ministry. The honeydoers sprucing up the church is ministry. Teaching Sunday school or leading youth group is ministry. Sending cards to fellow parishioners is ministry. Singing in the choir is ministry. Knitting prayer shawls is ministry. Driving someone to church who can't drive is ministry. Sometimes just being a shoulder to cry on, an ear to listen, or a voice to give kind words is ministry. I bet there is something you do regularly that is ministry, and you just didn't know it. God is funny that way. Not only is God calling you, he is calling you by name, just as Jesus called his disciples by name. Your call is not a blanket statement sent out to dozens of people. It is a call expressly for you. God knows your name, and she is calling you by it. Your call is personal, it is purposeful, and I bet it might even be life-changing. 28 years ago, I was a 15-year-old girl who God called. And today, I stand before you, a 43-year-old woman who often still thinks, God must have gotten this wrong. Surely at some point, he will realize I'm just the woman who sometimes still swears too much, who loses her temper, and who is definitely guilty of whispering in church when she sits by certain people. They will know who they are. And I'm the person who doubts herself. Then one of the Sunday school kids will hug me, or one of the youth group kids will say something so profound it humbles me, or someone will tell me how glad they are that I am here. And I remember God is equipping me for my ministry daily. She is giving me the tools I need to do what she has called me to do. I bet if you stop to really listen and think about it, your call will become more clear. And you will see God has been equipping you for it all along. God is funny that way. Amen.